I'm once again returning to the land of chivalry and peasants for an escalation list. Well, maybe that's not fair to say. I guess these guys are technically exiled from the land of Bretonnia. So maybe the lesson here is that horrific class suppression is more of a state of mind than a location. This video will help you build an exiles list for an escalation or slow growth style league. I'll take you through a list at each level, explain why I picked what I picked, and for some of these units that are meant to be kit bash or not sold directly by GW, I'll give you a few examples of how to either kit bash or find this model on a third-party seller like Etsy. The rules and restrictions I use to make these lists are listed here. Feel free to pause and read through at your leisure. But I also want to note that a huge goal of this video is going to be to really lean into the exile aspect. I want to make strong use of both exile only units and exile only items. And while these escalation lists themselves are not meant to be hyper competitive and min-maxed, I will share an example of a tournament list at the very end of this video. So let's get started with our 500 point list. Just like in my other videos, at 500 points, I'm focusing more on model count than I am individual characters or heroes. So for a general, I went with an outcast wizard. I made him demonology, and I actually paid extra to make him level 2. One of the nicer perks for exiles is these outcast wizards give Bretonnia access to lores of magic they wouldn't normally have. So I'm diving in with both feet and going with demonology. I paid extra to make him level 2, mostly because demonology has one of the higher average casting costs, and we're fishing for one of the 8+ spells, just so we have that as a fallback on turns we want to be less risky. That being said, if you don't want to play this risk, there's nothing wrong with taking battle magic or elementalism instead. With the rest of our 500 points, we're going to round out our core and set the solid foundation all the way up to 2000. Mounted Knights of the Realm are basically your catch-all can-do unit. They're going to be solid all the way to 2000 points, and I like running them in groups of 6, or sometimes 8. And do keep in mind that the lance formation might not always be the best choice. A 6-man lance gets 5 attacks on the charge, each outside knight, and a static +1 to your combat resolution due to being in lance formation. It also gets the added bonus of being more maneuverable and easier to charge multiple units into an enemy because you only have to make contact with that front rank. On the other hand, if you go with the standard line, you're going to have 6 attacks on the charge and a +1 combat resolution for being in close order. And the drawback being it's a little bit more unwieldy to move around and harder to combo charge with. Just something to keep in mind. You could honestly do a whole video just on the lance formation. But moving on, we're also taking a unit of mounted yeomen. This unit can act as a harasser if your opponent doesn't have an answer for them, but their main use for you is going to be as a screening unit to protect your knights and make sure that they are the ones charging. We are also bringing a unit of peasant bowmen, and they largely fill the same role. 10 peasant bowmen are not going to win or lose you the game, but at 50 points they are highly efficient and can be used for chip damage, to hold objectives, or probably most importantly to screen your other more important units. Always take skirmisher on them as well. For our last unit at 500 points, we're taking our yeoman guard, and this unit is actually a really nice perk for exiles lists. They are an all-around upgrade to our men-at-arms, and we're going to use them as kind of a super anvil. They're going to really bog down your opponents, but we're going to give them halberds to make them a lot more deadly than our men-at-arms could ever hope of being. As far as representing these non-standard Bretonnian models, we have a lot of pretty good choices. For your outcast wizard, for most people in most games, it wouldn't be the end of the world if you just try to save yourself a buck and use the damsel you probably already have. But if you're looking to invest in this list, you're probably looking towards the Empire Wizards. And over the lifetime of Warhammer Fantasy, the Empire has gotten several wizards on foot. A few of them are being sold right now. They'd all make a valid choice. But if you don't like the ones being explicitly sold for the old world, a lot of the old Empire mages are still being sold under the Age of Sigmar line. If you want to save some money and go third party, I know I simp for this brand a lot, but you gotta love Highland miniatures here. They just slot in next to official models so well, they're always my go-to for most factions. If you're buying them from an online store through Etsy or something, I would recommend getting these printed at slightly below 32mm for best fit. In either case, I wouldn't overthink it or spend too much money. You're not going to have a wizard on foot for many of your lists, especially as you grow past 500 points. At least not while you're playing Bretonnia. As far as your yeoman guard goes, I'll be honest with you, I've really only seen people use actual men-at-arms for this, and I really think that's probably the smart way to go. The only time it would be a problem is if you're running a unit of yeoman guard and a unit of men-at-arms, but I can't see that coming up for most people. But if you wanted to mix it up for diversity's sake, you could always throw in some of the men-at-arms from Highlands, or throw in some of the Empire infantry in a mixed unit to really kind of show their mixed Border Princess background. Moving on to our 1,000-point list, we're going to add mostly heroes and of course the Bombard. The strongest aspect of Bretonnia is objectively their heroes, and the Exiles are no exception to this. We're adding a Baron to our list to be our general, and we're going to give him one of the best weapons in the game, and look at that, it's only available to the Bretonnian Exiles. The Frontier Axe is highly efficient for its point cost and very, very deadly. There is no reason not to run this weapon anytime you're playing an Exiles list. We are also adding a Paladin to be our BSB, and if you've seen any of my videos, you're probably not shocked to see a War Banner here. It's very efficient for its point cost, and it's almost a default for me at any game at around 1,000 points. I want a BSB, I don't have a lot of points to spare, boom, the War Banner is always there, and always applicable in most situations. For the Wizard, we're going to go ahead and make him level 3, and putting him on a War Horse. If you are new to the game and this is your first army, do keep in mind that a war horse and a Bretonnian war horse are different and are actually on different base sizes. Keep him out of combat so you can cast his spells where they're most needed, and he should win your points back for him pretty easily. Our core is very similar to our 500 point list. We're just adding a few options and a few models here and there. We have 8 Knights of the Realm, and this is a good landing spot for both your Baron and your Paladin to make one hell of a unit. At a point level of 1,000 points, this should be pretty devastating to most things. If you choose to put them in a lance formation, they will be more devastating on the charge, but there is a big trade-off here. Because all of your outside knights are considered to be in base contact with your opponent's fighting rank, all of your opponent's fighting rank, so if your opponent chooses, they could direct all of their attacks to your Baron or your Paladin. And at this point level, they don't have a lot of defensive items to protect them, so choose your formation wisely before the charge. The last unit we're going to talk about at this point level, and one of the best reasons to make a Bretonnian Exiles list, is access to the Border Princess Bombard. Not quite as good as an Empire cannon, but not quite as expensive either. These Bombards really help make the Bretonnian Exiles a very powerful list, and are basically a unit you will auto-include. Your ideal target for your Bombards are going to be any smaller elite unit your opponent runs. So monsters, heroes mounted on dragons, those god-awful balloons, all great targets for your Bombards. Sourcing your Outcast Wizard is a bit more difficult now that he's on horseback. But I will say, just to start with, you can probably still get away with using your Damsel, which I'm sure you have. If you want to use official GW models, Empire Wizards will be your best bet, but unfortunately, they are not selling a mounted wizard right now, not even in the Age of Sigmar line. And that means you're either doing conversion work or finding old miniatures off of eBay. The good news is, some of these old miniatures are still very affordable. They're probably cheaper than if GW released a new one, but you probably will have to strip the paint. The bad news is, besides the paint stripping, some of these models are very rare, so depending on the flavor you want, this could be a very cheap or a very expensive endeavor. If you don't want to use your Damsel but want to go down the path of least resistance, I would again refer you to Highland Miniatures, which has a couple of different options for a mounted wizard. I also want to point out real quickly, because it's a cool old nerdy fact, is that before the lore of Bretonnia was really solidified, GW did produce 2 male mounted wizards for Bretonnia, so if you can find one of those and paint them up, that'd be a very cool model to use. The Border Prince Bombard is an interesting model to source. To the best of my knowledge, GW has never released a bombard model. They have a few different cannons, but technically there is a difference with cannons being a lot slimmer and newer and more modern than say a bombard would be. But we do have a few really great GW options. The Empire cannon is an obvious one, which is a solid if not inspired choice. With a little bit of conversion work, the Great Cannon from Age of Sigmar can make a great bombard. Take off the shielding in the front, convert a new crew, and leave off some of the more advanced bits, and before you know it, you have a really great bombard. To the surprise of no one, I also really like the Highlands Miniatures bombard. This is the model I use when I run Exiles, and I am very happy with it. It blends very well and is very easy to paint up. But if you want your bombard to be more of a statement piece in your army, I really have to point out Lost Kingdoms. The bombard itself is very epic, but I should point out that Lost Kingdoms does a more realistic proportion model, so they won't blend in very well. If I was using this, I would probably kit bash my own crew. At 1500 points, we're bringing in one of the best units in the game and really investing in our heroes. Our Baron is now mounted on a Royal Pegasus for maximum mobility. We are also giving him Serene's Locket, so he is immune from the kind of multi-wounds that we're trying to inflict on our opponent. Our Paladin also gets a big boost. We are also putting him on a Pegasus, giving him the Giant Blade and the Gauntlet of the Duel. The point of this unit is to be a monster slayer and a hero hunter. If he issues a challenge, your opponent will have to accept, and hopefully you come out on top. Please note that I am not paying for a lance on either of these units. This is a mistake I see a lot, even in a lot of tournament lists. In prior editions of this game, Bretonnia had a special rule where they could use a lance on the charge even if they have a magic weapon. That rule does not exist in the old world. If you have a magic weapon, you must use it. Paying for a lance is an absolute waste. The only other new thing we have at 1500 points is our unit of Pegasus Knights. Easily one of the best units, if not the best unit in the game. We're also going to pay an extra 20 points to make them immune to a stand and shoot action, which is an absolute bargain when it comes to this unit. It is so mobile, it can basically do anything. It could hunt down weak opponents, it could take out your opponent's strong units, and it could be an absolute monster bodyguard for some of your heroes. Just be careful not to overextend. It is a strong unit, but it is not invulnerable to your opponent's combo charges. I do want to take a second and talk about the power level of this list at 1500 points. This is where most groups really start bringing their big heavy hitters. And so I added a lot here as well. If in your group you think 2 Royal Pegasi and a full unit of Pegasus Knights is too much at 1500 points, by all means dial it back a little bit. Because we have no unusual units to add at 1500 points, we can move right into our 2000 point list. To start with, I rounded out our heroes by adding a couple of virtues. We give the Baron the virtue of knightly temper, and we gave the Paladin the virtue of heroism. Now that the Paladin has heroism, he is absolutely deadly with a normal weapon, so we take away his magic weapon, and we also replace his BSB banner with the rampaging banner. Sticking this Paladin with your Pegasus Knights will make them, on the whole, that much deadlier, and it will make it that much easier for you to make some of those longer charges. To shore up our core, we add another unit of Knights of the Realm, our BL unit, and basically a workhorse in this list. We are also adding another bombard here. In an escalation list, I don't normally double up on non-core units, but in the case of the Bretonnian Exiles, I want to get the feel of the Bretonnian Exiles. And it doesn't really feel like an exile list without those twin bombards. They're kind of a staple. For our last new unit, we're adding the small unit of Border Prince Brigands. I got this idea from somebody else's tournament list, and I really love the idea behind it. It's both fun, strong, and flavorful. By making them ambushers and giving them the ruby ring, this unit can threaten vulnerable units that your opponent might want to hide on the edges of the board, like say the artillery or certain ranged units. At minimum, even before this unit reaches the board, your opponent has to account for them. And being able to control your opponent's positioning is always a nice little perk. I really think this is a unit you'll have a lot of fun with in these 2000 point games. It's also the last odd unit we'll need the source. As far as official models go, I think you have to look at the state missile troops or the Free Company militia. The state troops fit the loadout, but the militia kind of fits the vibe of the brigands more. Finally, to end this video, I want to leave you with a 2000 point competitive list. What I would make for a tournament, no holds barred. Hopefully you can see the similarities between this list and the escalation list and see where I really crank things up. I shuffled the Baron and the Paladin around a little bit. I gave the Baron the virtue of heroism now, and then I loaded him up with defensive items. At the very minimum, this Baron will be very hard to remove from the table. I still want to make this Paladin a character hunter, but now that he has the Frontier Axe and the virtue of Knightly Temper, he is that much more deadly. There are very few units in the game that aren't afraid of this Paladin. Our wizard is very similar to before, but I found a little bit of room to give him a power scroll to help when he's doing a more important cast. I cut back on the Knights of the Realm in the core in order to make more room for Pegasus Knights, but I also buffed up our Yeoman Guard. This is still our Anvil unit, but with the Halberds it can do a decent amount of damage. But most importantly, at almost 40 models, it has great static resolution. This is going to be a very hard unit to get off the table for your opponent. This is great for holding objectives or King of the Hill. I'm not taking the mounted yeoman in this list, instead opting for 2 units of peasant bowmen. Not as mobile as the yeoman, but they are much cheaper. These are still going to be our screening units and also great for chip damage. They're not going to do a lot, but at 50 points, what they can put out is really good. It is hard not to get your points back for what you spend for peasant bowmen. Finally, you can see that everywhere I save points, I put it into another unit of Pegasus Knights. And this should be self-explanatory. It's the best unit in the game, and another unit is only going to help you. Is this the best 2000 point exile list ever? Probably not. I'm sure somebody a lot smarter than me can come up with an even more efficient list. But if you're getting into competitive Warhammer and want to play with Bretonnian Exiles, this list would be an excellent start. And as always, thanks for watching.